All right, here we are at DragonCon 2021 on the sci-fi literature track, and we're talking about the pulps. We're going to talk about some old pulps, some new pulps, some what is pulp, and have quite a bit of other interesting things to say about the pulps. And joining me for this exploration of that topic are these three gentlemen that you see here. Let's introduce ourselves, starting with Bobby.
Hi, I'm Bobby Nash. I'm an author. I have written my fair share of what we call new pulp. I am happy to be here.
And Teal James Glenn, introduce yourself, please, sir.
Hello, I'm like the man said, Teal James Glenn. I've written a lot of new pulp stuff, and I've been lucky enough to write new versions, new stories of some of the old classic pulp characters. This is a delight to be here.
All right, and Sean.
And I'm Sean. Hi. No,
Hi,
I'm Sean.
I'm
Sean Taylor. I've written a lot of new pulp, along with some science fiction, horror, comics, that sort of thing. And if you want to know more about that, just go to thetaylorverse.com. It'll have you all that stuff. So.
And I am your host, Mr. Rourke. No, I am Van Allen Plexico, and I write the Sentinel superhero novels and the Harper and Salsa crime novels and several other and sci-fi. Got comics coming out, a lot of pulp stuff, and as well as nonfiction, sports. I've edited quite a few anthologies of new pulp, and got a reprint of one of those coming out this summer, Gideon Kane Demon Hunter, which I'm looking forward to. So, and of course, the host of the White Rocket podcast, among others. So let us talk about it. Yes, the first thing we always have to do when we have like a hard 50-minute time limit here, just so everybody knows.
This one question could take the whole 50 minutes in some cases.
I know. We have to be mindful of our time frame and save time for everything. We may have another person joining us at some point where there's still some question about that, but we'll see. But anyway, so for those that are watching that don't really know exactly what we're talking about, there's always the people that their only experience is the Pulp Fiction movie, which really has very little to do with pulp writing. So who wants to go first on kind of throwing out an explanation of exactly what it is we're talking about here?
I can do that. Strictly speaking, pulps are adventure and other literature that was published on low-quality pulp paper from essentially the early part of the 20th century all the way up into the 1950s. Although the classic period we think of in pulps is like 1930 to about 1948, 1950, last one being published in 55, which was The Black Bat. They are popular literature. They were what you could get for a dime or in some cases a nickel. And they filled the niche for people who wanted to have something to read. This was before paperbacks existed. So they were very much the popular excitement literature.
Yeah, and they were in contrast. The pulps obviously were the cheaply done things as opposed to the slicks, which were your nice, high-paying, in some cases, magazines. If you weren't getting in those, you would basically slum it and write 17 stories a month to get paid the same as one might get paid for the slicks kind of thing. But pulps, the thing I like about it is they were pass around literature. It was like you read it, you roll it up, you slip it in your back pocket, you pass it along to somebody else before you get a new one or get one from somebody else. Like, hey, I finished reading the Western one. Do you want to read the sci-fi? Sure, It was for the masses. It was the people's story.
Yeah, and especially once the war started, they were highly recyclable.
Yeah.
So recycling them, which is why they are part of the reason those pulps are more expensive today is there are so few of them because of the war recycling efforts. But like Sean said, this was the kind of thing where, writers would go and over the course of 1 to 2 days pop out almost a book, like a small book, what we'd call a novella today, probably. And they would do it over the weekend for like a penny a word. Yeah. But this was how a lot of these journeyman writers made their money. You know, we think of some of these guys as doing, we think of it now as really good literature, but like guys like Edgar Rice Burroughs and William Gibson and whatnot, these guys just sit down and pump this stuff out.
Yep. There were cases of a guy walking into an office to turn in one story. The editor would go, I got this painting of a cover. I need a 30,000 word novel by tomorrow. Can you do it? And they'd go home and do it.
Yep.
Just
on typewriters.
On giant typewriters you have to pound with your hands. Yes.
Yeah.
Astounding.
I like that you said we. Oh, go ahead. I said I like that Bobby said we think of this as great literature because I'm like, where did that come from? Because
well, a lot of people do though, but there are a lot of people
today.
This is
hey, Dashiell Hammett, Ray Bradbury, people forget they started in the pulps.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but we remember those guys are the classics, so they're kind of penultimates. But just like today, like so much is throwaway, you know.
Maybe I should have said classic instead of great literature.
Well,
but yeah, they've become popular in the classics, with time. We look. It's almost like a cult movie. Movie comes out, bombs at the box office. Nobody talks about it. 20 years later, it's playing on TNT or HBO Max, and suddenly it becomes this huge hit, and people forget that it bombed. It just becomes.
Now we should summon the spirit of Mike Bullock.
Yes.
Let us all concentrate.
Yes. If we all concentrate, I think we can bring him into the. Hey, there we go.
Hey.
All right. Welcome aboard, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
Up. Your audio up a little bit.
Let me see. Test. Is that better?
You're getting better.
Getting better? How's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Sound great.
So if somebody could send me a watch with Eastern Standard Time instead of Central, I could probably function a little better. But
we can't afford those. We just use sundials.
Yeah, I think Pulp and I think Chicago. So I'm like, oh, it's in Chicago time. So
there you go. Well, introduce yourself, Mike. We were just starting out. We introduced ourselves, and they were trying to explain what Pulp is.
My name is Mike Bullock. I am a writer. I suffer from an excess of imagination, and if I can't get things out creatively, I literally start to come apart at the seams. So that has led to I was able to write The Phantom for Moonstone Books for quite a long time. Produced more Phantom comic books than any other American aside from Lee Falk ever, which I think is really, really just an awesome thing to have been able to do. And beyond that, I just love all things pulp.
There you go. All right. So we've heard the other three gentlemen besides me. I haven't had my shot yet. Take a kind of a crack at explaining what exactly pulp is, what makes it different from other literature and so forth. What are your thoughts on that? Well,
I think first, it's easy to pigeonhole it, and it's easy to decide it's just one particular genre. Like I've talked to plenty of people who think it's all about, private eyes and seedy alleyways, stories like that. But I think what a lot of people forget is pulp spanned almost all the genres. There were romance pulps, horror pulps. My personal favorite was sword and sorcery. All those different kinds of things. But I think it really kind of comes down to, I believe it was Tommy Hancock coined it best as it's just a very fast-paced, imaginative storytelling.
Yep.
You don't get into the Stephen King, I'm going to spend 4 pages describing the embroidery and the curtains and that kind of nonsense.
I think that the only thing that pulp can't be is dull.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think if you bring it to a modern day thing, I would call like the Harlequin romances, especially that were big in the 80s, 70s and 80s. Those were pure, romance pulp, even though they didn't call it that.
It's a style. It's not a genre. That's the most important thing, I think, is that it's like comics. Comics are not a genre. They are a way of telling a story. Mm-hmm. It's like saying, to say that pulp is just private eye or something is like saying television is just game shows.
Yeah.
It's a medium. And as you guys said a minute ago, the particular benefit of it is that it was inexpensive. Today, I think we've all pretty much come to the conclusion that today's version of pulp in terms of a delivery system is like ebooks, Kindle, that kind of thing. It's the cheapest way to get the story out to the most people. Mm-hmm. And, a few years ago, that was print on demand. Today it's Kindle, and sales tend to kind of reflect that often. So, all right. Well, I guess we should go around. Any other thoughts before we're going to get in the categories? We got some interesting categories we want to dig through, and I think it's going to take us a little while to get through them because I know you guys are going to have lots to say about it, and that's awesome. So, but any other thoughts about Pulp that people need to know before we do that?
I don't like it in my orange juice.
No.
Or his coffee.
Or my.
I mean, the paper starts to disintegrate, and it just
they do get nice and yellow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is, by the way, that does remind me of one of the things that something you said a minute ago. You guys said reminded me is that you're talking about the slicks versus the pulps, and that's the great irony of the pulps. Is that back in the day when they were being produced, the prestige was in the slicks and the pulps were throwaway. But today, when you go around and find these leather-bound, acid-free, preserved volumes, it's pulp in it. The slick stuff is long gone. Nobody wants a leather-bound collection of that.
During his lifetime, that great hack writer Shakespeare, what he was doing was considered junk. The literature of the time were the sonnets. That's what everyone aspired to write. Nobody wrote plays that had any respect for themselves. So he's the ultimate pulp writer, the ultimate, hack that turns out what people actually want to hear. And there can be an enormous amount of quality in that.
I love that crossover where Doc Savage fought Hamlet. That was incredible.
Yeah. Well, the spider was perfect in Coriolanus because there was so much.
Told you there was something rotten in Denmark.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell my students, people get off of work and go over to the Globe to watch Midsummer Night's Dream like they come home and watch Big Bang Theory or something. That was it was government subsidized propaganda and sitcom. Sure, yeah. Pro Elizabeth propaganda. Well, let's get to our categories here. We've got a few, and I think this will be kind of neat. The first thing I want to go around the horn and ask, and I guess I'm going to kind of work my way. Everybody sees this probably differently, but I got Bobby next to me, which is cool. So, Bobby, let's start out with you. Who is the greatest pulp character? And I figure when we do this, we're going to hear about the biographies briefly of several cool ones. So it's a good question. So, Bobby, in your opinion, who is the greatest pulp character of the day, back in the day?
I have it down to two, and the reason for this, one of them I'm very biased on, and it's a character I had never heard of until I was actually tapped to write the character, and that's the character of the Domino Lady, which you guys can see on the poster on the wall there, if I lean the right direction. In reading, she only appeared in 6 stories back in the heydays of the pulps, and they were the spicy pulps. In today's terminology, that's the stuff you got behind the counter, wrapped in plastic, so you couldn't see the cover. And she was a very interesting character. What made her spicy was not only that she was a woman character who dressed provocatively, but she was not afraid to have sex, which in those stories, she goes in for the clinch, the camera goes off this way, and, later, but there's a lot of innuendo and things like that in the stories. So when I was tapped to write the character, I went and found reprints of those original stories and read them. And my first thought was not only how cool a character she is, but that those stories could be told with very few changes and be set today. That there was very little that needed to be changed to make her viable today. We could film those, and that would be a 6-episode miniseries with very few changes. And so, but she's a very smart character. It's not just from looking at the covers and everything. Yes, it's about the figure, it's about the low-cut dress, blah, blah, blah. But when you read them, she is a super intelligent character who has this interesting gimmick of most of her villains were crooked politicians, corrupt businessmen, dirty cops, things like that. She would write them letters on white ink on black paper, mail them letters anonymous that says, I know what you did. And here's what I'm going to do to you because I know what you did. And so she would warn them, I'm coming for you. And here's what I'm after. So they would be on guard against this, and she would still outsmart them. And I think that was what really made me fall in love with the character, was not that she could shoot them and fight, but that she could outsmart people. She was very intelligent. And so and having written her multiple times now, I've really just, the more I write her, the more I love the character. But the other one I thought of, just from a gimmick standpoint, is Secret Agent X, the man of 1,000 faces who could become anybody, and which makes for some interesting stories because he can be anybody, and the reasons for him taking people's places or just becoming this character to get involved with something. I just found those two characters to be very compelling. And also, like Domino Lady, Secret Agent X's origin, with only minor tweaks, works today, which I actually did write that, because he was in a war in Afghanistan when something happened to him that allowed him,
always in a war in Afghanistan,
that allowed him to learn this skill. And then he goes to work, doing, put that skill to use. So with very few tweaks, his origin works just as well as Domino Lady's. Yeah.
Bobby, I got to say, I'm going to get to Teal next, but I got to say, I was telling somebody the other day, I love how in the new Sherlock Holmes, Watson was still injured in Afghanistan because the British were there in the 1800s and they were there in the around 2000. So you just can't get out of it.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Alexander the Great said, he went around Afghanistan. Okay?
Yeah.
But no, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. You know what? Our grandkids will be at this one, doing one of these in 30 years going, this character. We're in the war in Afghanistan, and
there's nothing there but crazy. Anyway, Mr. Glenn, go ahead, sir.
Mine are probably more traditional, but in terms of the greatest of the pulp characters, because I agree with Bobby, there's a lot of really cool minor characters that are fascinating, but for me, Doc Savage starts the list. He is the ultimate science hero. He is all about his brain, although he's physically perfect. He was raised by his father and a bunch of scientists to dedicate himself to fight evil. And what most people forget is that his first story, Man of Bronze, he's 18 years old. He's not the wrinkly looking guy who's on the cover. That was a 35-year-old actor that was painted as him. He was supposed to be very young, but incredibly smart, a surgeon, had all these cool sidekicks with him. And so for me, he is the embodiment of like the science hero pulp guy. And the other one that to me is greatest, and in both cases, I think the characters transcend the writer, like Sherlock Holmes transcended Conan Doyle. The other one is Tarzan. Tarzan, which was only written as a one-off. He had no idea of ever writing a second book until an editor said, "Give me a second book." And he went, "What? You pay me?" "Yes, okay, I'll write it." Which is why they're not actually as well written as his John Carter books. But to me, he is the embodiment of every civilized person's fantasy to become this primitive superhero who is nobler than noble and smarter than smart. Guy teaches himself languages constantly. He's nothing like the dumb moron in most of the movies, and gets into all these fantasy adventures. So I think in terms of pulp characters, those are the greatest, not necessarily the best, but to me, the ones that, between the two of them, there have to be 150 knockoffs of those two characters.
Yeah.
Maybe more. Tarzan certainly has billions, but there's a lot that even my Dr. Shadows is a shadow of Doc Savage. But I think those are the two. So I cede the floor.
John.
I'm going to have to say Golden Amazon because, like Bobby, I think I like the characters who they're not the ones that people automatically default to. To me, they had some of the stronger stories, but they weren't like Teal just said, that they weren't knockoffs of something else, because there's so many characters who are knockoffs of, the Shadow, or knockoffs of Tarzan, or knockoffs of, Doc Savage. And to some degree, you could say that Golden Amazon is, but the thing I like about her is that her stories and as a character, she is so complicated, and not just because she has two origins. The first being that she was basically saved from planet Venus and is adopted. She's sort of a Superman-ish type of character, only a woman. And then the second being there's some kind of, manipulation chemically to her, and that gives her these superpowers, and she's supposed to bring a way of peace. But the thing, and this is where all the thing that I love about her is that she's such a complicated character. She's not this perfect good like you think of Doc Savage, right? He's always going to do the right thing because it's built into his makeup as a person. I can't do wrong. He cannot tell a lie. He did chop the cherry tree, sort of thing. Yeah. But for her, she's like, all right, if I'm going to make the world perfect, I'm going to do it my way because I know better than anybody else. She's both Charles Xavier and Magneto at the same time.
Yeah.
And to me, that makes her character so much more compelling because there's so much more going on underneath her than just do the right thing kind of thing. And in a time when the pulps were all about very clear cut, this is black, this is white, this is good, this is evil. You've got this character like the Golden Amazon who's both, but yet she's the hero, and I love that. So to me, definitely Golden Amazon.
First major anti-hero in many ways.
Yeah. And she was a strong female lead in stories. So,
her and I think the Spider I would probably categorize as that too. They were of the shoot first, ask questions later.
Mm-hmm. If at all.
If at all, yeah.
Can't ask good, man.
What you got, Mike?
All right. So first off, for me, this is not going to come as a surprise to anybody who knows me, but Conan, number one. He was the character that launched an entire genre. Robert E. Howard came up with other characters after him that followed in the same vein, but so did thousands of other writers. There are so many Conan knockoffs to speak of knockoffs of characters. He not only was an archetype for an entire type of hero, but an entire, other world based in historical truths, but a lot of variations in a lot of places where the timeline split off. Robert E. Howard just wrote some really incredible stuff. And I think that Conan, if it wasn't for Conan, what we consider to be fiction and exciting adventure stories these days wouldn't be what it is. And then the second one will kind of tie in with what Sean has, and I'll touch on that in a sec, is Gladiator. I think if it wasn't for the original Gladiator book, you wouldn't have the majority of what is superheroes these days.
But is it technically pulp?
Depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
So, and, to also into that camp, I think Zorro kind of also led to a lot of that, but Zorro's also, is that really pulp? Is it not?
Well,
it depends on how technical you get.
It was in the pulps first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but, with Gladiator, I think it's the duality of the character. He's at once the strongest human on the planet, and he's facing problems that you can't solve with brute strength.
Yeah.
And I think that defines him.
I found out recently? They made a movie with Buster Keaton of Gladiator.
I bet you that was cool.
As a comedy.
Mm-hmm. See, that should pop up on Netflix, like Bobby just said, and it can not be a flop anymore.
Yeah.
So, but to touch again on what Sean was talking about, I think Gladiator and Golden Amazon make a great mix. I'm plugging the story I just wrote for Moonstone right now. That should be coming out soon. But,
nice.
I think that, Gladiator, just the wake of what he left behind, and the same with Conan. The impact those two characters have had on, pop culture in every decade since their inception is undeniable.
Well, I was definitely going to say Conan, and I'm a big Robert E. Howard fan. I love Solomon Kane at least as much as Conan too. They're both fantastic. But I guess I've got to go John Carter of Mars, despite what the movie did or didn't do for his reputation. Still a great story, still a great movie, still a great character. A very misunderstood character because his main power is not that he can, fly or jump or whatever, because that was just because he was on Mars. His main power is he's immortal. He's basically a Highlander.
Yeah,
people totally miss the fact that he's essentially an immortal, like Highlander or an Amber Prince. And he just happened to be on Mars on those stories. You could do 1,000 more John Carter stories where he's doing other stuff, which is really cool. And then I think the other one, this is a little more recent, but I think this is kind of like, there's like the pulps from the 30s and 40s, and there's the pulps, the new pulp of today. But there was pulp in like the paperbacks in the 60s and 70s into the 80s even. And my personal favorite is Parker, the Donald Westlake, Richard Stark Parker, which to me is 100% pulp. It's so formulaic, but yet it's so effective. And he's one of my absolute favorite characters. the criminal heist artist who, they always say, oh, but has a heart of gold. No, Parker does not have a heart of gold at all. He's quite the opposite. And that's why he's been in so many movies and they've never done him right, because the whole thing that makes him work is that he's totally amoral. He's not a bad guy or a good guy. He's a force of nature. He's like Galactus more than he is like a good guy or a bad guy.
The closest was Lee Marvin.
Oh yeah. But even still, I have issues with that movie, Point Blank.
Well, yeah,
okay.
But yeah, cool.
I'm going to shuffle things around a little bit. I want to make sure we get to some that I like here. I want to ask you this as a double question. And if you don't have an answer for it, it's fine. But I'm curious about this. I'll start with Bobby again. We'll work around. What pulp property or trope has aged the best, and which one has aged the worst? In other words, what still works really well today, and what is like, oh man, that's cringes. What do you think?
I certainly think the things that are not tied to a specific time frame have aged better. I think Tarzan works in whatever era. Conan, is kind of, even though they just stuck to a mythical time, they still work because you don't have to worry about our passage of time. So I think almost all of ERB stuff Pellucidar, the stuff in Pellucidar, there's Core and all that stuff, because that could take place at any time. So I think those hold up. Some of the ones that are tied to a specific moment in time, not that the stories don't hold up, but I think we've changed, as things change and people learn things, the ways certain characters are treated, certainly slang, who the villains can be. We have a lot of stereotypical villains. There is a good bit of racism in a lot of the old pulps. Mm-hmm. But you look at it from that was just how people were at the time. Sure. So, but as we have progressed, you look on those things now, and there are some stories like that you kind of read it and go, mm-hmm. And I know there was big discussions with a lot of us and other people when we started doing new pulp stories with those characters set in those time frames. There were a lot of discussions. Do we do it the way they did it, or do we take into consideration modern sensibilities? I know there were a lot of discussions with a lot of writers and publishers about those very things. And so, but like I said, some of that stuff, you kind of cringe when you read it now. The way certain types of characters were treated just doesn't hold up. But I think anything with the stories, I think hold up pretty well. Some of the plots were simple, bad guy here, good guy here, good guy needs to stop bad guy. Barry Reese put it this way once, and I love this, and I'll end on this. It's, if you have Nazis who have created an ice cannon, Doc Savage needs to go kick their ass. That's your plot. and I love that,
Yeah. Barry's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that, Bobby, you've pretty much nailed this category, but I'll go around anyway and just see if you guys want to add anything. I think you've covered most of it. Teal, what do you think? I
was going to say that the rich white guy with the non-white sidekick absolutely doesn't fly anymore.
Yeah.
Doc Savage doing unlicensed brain surgery on people with no controls. That's not going to fly. It's like, hey, I've captured him. Let's go stick some pins in his head and make him nice.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. The stuff that still works are straight up revenge stories. That the spider is like, I'll kill everything bad in front of me, and there'll be hundreds of thousands dead, but nobody will really mind because everyone knows they're really scummy. There's that still works because that's the plot of every freaking Liam Neeson movie.
Yeah. Honestly, that is a good point. Is that all these Liam Neeson movies, these action movies, are basically pulp movies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Liam Neeson could very easily be Cranston.
Yeah.
He could very easily be any one of like the main pulp heroes of the time. I have a particular set of skills. I will find you. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But the other thing that actually still works, which seems bizarre, is the hero has some secret hoard of money somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Aztec, Tibetan, Mayan, because even more than then, nowadays we realize you got to have a lot of money to be a Mr. Hero. You got to be a billionaire. And if you didn't do it yourself, it has to be because some lost civilization handed you a pile of money. That's the only way you could afford to run around all the time. And
That's why I don't fight crime.
Yeah.
I think I just heard a challenge to every writer out there to create the homeless hero.
Yeah, well, and
Hobo
that's
with a
what's-
shotgun.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say.
well, and I got to say, I agree with you on and building on that about the the characters that can still do it because their story still works, right? I think that's why folks like the Black Bat, for example, they can work whatever setting you want to put them into, whatever time frame, because the character itself, there's a level of genericness to it. Anytime you put a dude in something that covers his face, there's a genericness to it that unless it says something specific time-wise, like Bobby says, it's going to work. Whatever
Captain
you do with it.
1941.
Yes. Yeah, that wouldn't work. But yeah, you take the Black Bat, you can make him, he can become any race, he can become any whatever, he can, and in any time period, and he's going to work because there is something intrinsic. It's kind of like, we can call blue anything we want to, but there is something behind the word that is essentially and intrinsically blue that we can't. There's an intrinsic truth behind that, and it's the same thing for characters like the Black Bat or the Shadow. There's an intrinsic truth of who that character is that can work anywhere, anytime, any whatever. But I do disagree with you. I think Teal on the. For me, the 1% hero is played out. I am so sick of that. I am tired of the people with all the money. To me, the characters that I encountered, like Spider-Man in the 70s, he didn't have money. He was always down on his luck. And to me, that changed. And I really identified more with I got away from the rich hero who, can do whatever and blah, 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 as opposed to the, yeah.
I just saying it could work. I still prefer, Sam Spade looking for a buck to, Chandler's character who never asked for money. To me, that's still more real. But
Right.
It can still work because
It can work. I guess personally, I can't write that because that type of mentality just drives me crazy, and I can't. And like Bobby said, the shorthand racism just doesn't work. The yellow peril, the whatever, you can't. That's just not going to fly. So, Mike.
I'm going to take a left turn here, and I'm going to say one of the things I loved about the Phantom was his storytelling was the embodiment of the cliche ripped from the headlines. Lee Falk took stuff from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, whatever the challenge was, he addressed it. And so the Phantom's rogues gallery was always changing with the times. So you could write a Phantom story in the 21st century where he, I did a story where he takes on Somali pirates who are holding hostages on a freighter. And it was just as much a Phantom story as if I had written one in the 50s where he was beating up Nazis that were left over from the Third Reich.
Oh, yeah.
So
That is the perfect generational character. He never ages. To me, I love the Phantom. So, yeah.
Oddly enough, he had his 30th birthday 75 years ago. If I can figure out how he did it, I'm doing it myself because aging sucks, but it's worked for him.
You got to wear a purple suit. It holds everything tight.
There you go.
All right. The next question I want to get to, and again, I'm kind of picking and choosing among the ones because time always goes so quickly on these things. We always have so much fun, and we just don't have time to do everything we want to do. I think the next one I want to ask you is, who is the greatest pulp writer? And this is from the classic era. I don't mean like, me or something. Although I know you all want to say me, and I appreciate it.
Go ahead and
I appreciate it.
Sorry, Bobby. I'll have to give you your money back later.
Yeah, I was going to say Van, but no. You know what?
You have to go with the classics.
Yeah. You know what? I have to give it to Edgar Rice Burroughs. And it's tough to narrow this down. There's a lot of fantastic, writers out there, but I love Burroughs' work. I think Burroughs created some amazing worlds, and concepts and that are fun to read today and revisit today just as much as they were then.
Yeah, very good. All right. Phil?
Mhm.
I would have gone with Burroughs, but I'll do a different one. And for me, it really is a toss-up between Ray Bradbury and Robert E. Howard. For two completely different reasons. But people forget that Bradbury was a pulp writer. He wrote every one of the genres too. Horror, detective, because he proved that it doesn't have to be throwaway stuff. On the other hand, Robert E. Howard changed my life. Robert E. Howard, when you read his original stuff, not stuff that's been re-edited or cleaned up, even with the inherent racism in some of it that got less as he grew up and got old, he grew as a person, and you can see it in his writing. He found a way to reach through the page and just grab you by the throat with everything he wrote. Even if the plot didn't work, you didn't care. It just pulled you along with it. His detective stories are terrible, but you don't care.
Absolutely. I gotta tell you a quick story about Ray Bradbury that I just read the other day. I'm reading the Harlan Ellison biography, Lit Fuse, and there's a little David Gerald wrote the introduction, and it just really quick. Gerald said he was at Harlan Ellison's house, and Ellison got a phone call, and Ellison's like talking for a few minutes and hangs up, and Harlan Ellison turns to David Gerald and says, that was Ray Bradbury, and he says a couple of things. He says, you know the difference between you and me and Ray Bradbury, David? And David's like, what? He says, you and I know this is just a game. Bradbury believes this crap. And I thought that was interesting. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Sean, what do you got?
I'm going to pull a name from out of left field that most people probably wouldn't know, and that's William Fitzgerald Jenkins, who you would probably know as Murray Leinster. And the thing I love about Murray's work is that he, like Ray Bradbury, he did everything. But the thing that I really, really love is that he has so much non-serial work that I can just read in a sitting and pass on and jump to another story and jump to another story. Because, the thing we always think about the pulps are the serial work, right? I can read one Black Bat story and another Black Bat story and another, or one Doc Savage, and, but there are so many standalone stories that are just fantastic and get overlooked. And as a writer, I tend to not write serials either. If you I think the Rick Ruby stuff is the closest I've gotten to a serial, unless we ever do another, the Mars books for you there, Van. Maybe. So, but yeah, these standalone stories were so good, but they're so often forgotten. And that's why I love Murray's work. Now, he had some more stuff that was closer to serialization, but his earlier stuff, if you go, he was writing romance, westerns, thrillers, and everything. And they're all just these great stories. It's like, he's not the Nobel poet laureate or whatever for any of these things, but he is always consistent. And you're never going to find a story that you go, oh, that's crap, So, yeah, Murray Leinster or Leinster, however you say the name.
Yeah, I've never known exactly. Mike, what you got?
I'm going to go back to the two already touched on in Burroughs and Howard. I think the thing I loved about them is both of them had the ability in one sentence to tell you what most writers take a paragraph or two to get across. They could, say the character walks in the room and this happens, and all of a sudden you've got, this great picture of what the room looks like. You see everybody in it. You understand the temperature. You understand all those things in a very short time span. And Howard had a way of using words that not too many people were using at the time in ways that people weren't necessarily using them to really give it a flavor that nobody else was kind of capturing, that lent to, the authenticity of the worlds he was creating. So
I think he gave the term purple prose positive meaning. He had so much color in every phrase and so much depth to every sentence that it just took your breath away. I do want to throw in
it wasn't purple, it was ultraviolet.
No, it was Stygian.
Stygian. I want to throw in is Lester Dent, who is a personal idol of mine, who people kind of forget because he was writing to a very strict formula. But you can, if you read his stuff in sequence, you can watch a writer progress so that by the time he did his mystery books in the 50s, he was an incredibly skilled writer. His Oscar sale stuff is just gorgeous. But people think of the character, not the writer.
Right.
And the thing about the others is that you know them as writers. They eclipse their characters because they did more than one.
Yeah, and there were so many unknown, or we knew because there was a lot of house names.
Oh yeah,
like to this day, no one knows who wrote the original Domino Ladies. No one knows. Lars Anderson was a made-up house name. There's a lot of those, but there were also, as we mentioned earlier, this was not glamorous work. So there were a lot of writers who were real writers who worked under pen names writing pulps. Michael Crichton wrote pulps as John Lang. Completely different style and everything, but they're fantastic. But if he'd have wrote those under his own name, we might never have gotten the Andromeda Strain or Jurassic Park, because he would have been pegged in those days as just a pulp guy and not given those opportunities.
Yeah.
I have to, again, another quick little story, the Lester Dent story I love, and a couple of you have heard this before, that he was first starting out, he was working someplace that had typewriters, a bunch of typewriters. So he would stay late or come in early and be typing these stories up when he wasn't working. And this guy comes in and is like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm writing these stories for the pulps." And the guy's like, "You're writing stories?" Yeah, just making fun of him, laughing. He's like, "What do you make doing that?" Dent said, "Oh, I make this much money." Guy sat down, started typing right next to him, hammering out a story. So yeah, I mean, he was doing quite well.
Yeah.
So let me see. We do. Okay. Which pulp property could and should be made into an Amazon or Netflix series tomorrow?
You know what? As I said earlier, I think Domino Lady or Secret Agent X are ready to go. They don't require much in the way of reinvention at all. There are other characters too. Remo. We talked beforehand about Remo Williams. I think Remo Williams is ripe for a comeback.
Well, I think Domino and Lady and Secret Agent X these are tropes and character archetypes that people totally get. You don't have to explain them,
Right. Because she's basically she's Batman in a dress.
Yeah.
And a domino mask.
I can't unsee that.
Yeah. and Secret Agent X. Secret Agent X. The best way to tell that to a new audience. Look at the Mission Impossible movies now with all the stuff they're doing with the quick mask. That's Secret Agent X.
Mine would be Operator 5. The purple saga would be phenomenal. It will go into the audience that loves Walking Dead and apocalyptic stuff. And and it's a fictional country. So you just make up either a fictional country or make it some secret organization for the Emperor, and you're set. The other one would be Click Rush, the Gadget Man. It's basically MacGyver. He's a guy who uses cool science stuff. It was a Lester Dent character. And the last one is the Avenger, simply because of that makeup stuff. And it's got the most realistic origin of any of them. They killed his wife and kid. He solves the murder. It's changed him as a man, and he goes out for justice. Plus, he had a group of interracial assistants that were treated evenly. They were college grads, so that it would actually require very little updating at all.
There's an age the best for sure. Yeah. I didn't answer that question, Mingo, by the way. I have to say that definitely age the worst is the racial stuff and the way that women are treated for sure. But again, Marvel was still treating women that way pretty much into the 60s, early 70s. So it's just one of those societal things.
Still doing yellow face on actors into the 70s, for God's sakes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that's aged the best. I think I agree. That is these motivations that everybody can understand. They're timeless. Sean,
obviously, I'm going to go with Amazon doing a Golden Amazon animated series. That would be fantastic. It would have to be animated to really pull it off. But I think because it is, the sort of conflicted hero, right, that you get now with stuff like The Boys and stuff like Invincible. That's a huge trope, right? So to have this, basically female version of, Superman and going, I know what's best, I'm going to do it, so I think that would fly with no pun intended, with modern audiences. Another one that I think would do really well is Dr. Death. The bad guy is the hero of the series. We've seen it with Dexter. We've seen it with so many different things. And again, it's the same thing. He's the hero of his own story, just like Magneto. I know what's best. It just means I have to kill.
I can't deal with a hero named Ascot Keen. I just can't.
Well, we changed his name. And the last one, and this is one I would really love to see. I cannot remember the name of the story. It's a one-off story from a science fantasy story. And it's about these group of men. They're boat wrecks. They end up on this island, and there are these flying women on the island. And they fall in love with these women, and they realize the only way to keep the women from leaving is to cut off their wings. And I could see that pulled off over like a standalone season to tell that story. And it is one of my favorite pulp stories to this day, because I mean, that was done. I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was in the early 40s. And and I think it was a male writer who did it. Like I said, I got to remember the title of the story to do it. I remember the cover, but I can never find it.
That could be a Black Mirror, Sean.
It could be a Black Mirror, but it's so ahead of its time. I mean, that story said, holy crap, look at the way we as men, to stay the way we are as men, have to treat women. And I think that is a powerful story that would be really well received today. And of course, it would get your all of the people complaining about how you're pandering again, just like everything else. But it's not. I mean, this was an early take on that. So yeah,
but that seems like the kind of thing HBO would jump all over.
And it's a fantastic story. But again, it's a one-off story, and I cannot remember who wrote it or what it was called. I just remember the story so strongly because at the end of it, the guys are holding the wings. And they burn them, and the women are like, they have no idea what to do, and they just kind of pull into themselves and become good little 1950s housewives, basically. Wow. And it was a powerful, powerful story. Mike,
I don't know how you follow that.
Follow that.
So I would think Gladiator and Mr. Keen. I think Gladiator because so many people these days just want to snap their fingers and have all the power and have all that. But as you see in Gladiator's story, having all that really doesn't solve your problems.
Yep.
So you give the people the answer to, this is what I've always wanted, and this is what I wish I was the strongest guy around, or I wish this, that, the other, I wish I was immortal. And then you get it and you find out, well, that doesn't help me pay the rent. That doesn't help me deal with this person over here who's doing this atrocious thing. Doesn't help me solve the ills of the world. And then with Mr. Keen, I think, you saw that kind of to some extent with Person of Interest. You've got this shadowy character behind the scenes who has this information access like no other, and he can grab some operatives and pull them in and have them affect change. So I think both of those would work really well in the current atmosphere.
I think actually for Smallville, they took an awful lot from Gladiator. The whole progression of I can't play sports, I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that was taken directly from Gladiator.
Yeah, well, I mean, Superman was taken directly from Gladiator.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, they went to that part of Gladiator and used it, which hadn't been used in Superman itself.
Yeah, I think Gladiator stuff, and this is, I've gotten in trouble with my editors for this, because you take what is a character's central conceit, their true power, right? Whether they fly a plane, whether they're super strong, and then you put them in a situation where that doesn't help them. Right. And how do they do it? Like, the Lance Starr stuff, the editor looked at, he's like, he's not even in a plane. I'm like, well, exactly. He's going to win if he's in a plane. What's he going to do out of the plane? Yeah. That's when I get to see if he's a hero, right? But no, those are fun things to do where you take the hero and say, let's not play to your strengths, because if you can punch something, it's an automatic win. Let's see what happens when you have to outthink something,
That's like my story of the Iron Ace at the soccer mom meeting.
9, ladies, 9.
And that's it. Yeah.
This is really hard for me because I think there's a John Carter Netflix show out there that could be great. I think that we obviously want to see Conan the Barbarian adapted into just imagine like a big Conan story. Or you could do it like Bosch, where you take 2 or 3 books or stories and make a season out of each one.
Yeah, I think you could take the Black Coast from Conan would make an incredible Netflix story.
One he's a mercenary, one he's a thief, one he's a he's done everything, and you could just have a different season for each one. And then I desperately want Parker to be done right. And again, you take 2 books and you make a season out of each pair of books, just like Bosch. It worked so perfectly.
Yeah, did you see the comic strip book of them that they did a really nice job with?
Oh yeah, the Darwin Cook stuff. Yeah,
Darwin Cook. Yeah.
Yeah.
But see, I think that's where we're going to get some of these better adaptations of these things, because yes, distilling Conan into an hour-and-a-half movie, there's a lot that doesn't translate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Put that over 10-hour-long, 45-minute episodes. Then you have chances to play up all those things that we as readers of these characters have fallen in love with, which are the character beats that usually get lost in the movie, but in place of action scenes. Because
I'd also say adapt the damn stories for God's sake.
Right.
Yeah, if they'd have stuck to a Princess of Mars and actually done that, that John Carter movie would have been
the sections that were actually from the book were excellent.
Well,
yes.
The rest of it was like, what?
Yeah. Because Captain John Carter was a pretentious, self-indulgent, entitled.
I consider the first 3 Carter books to be the best action novel ever written, and the 2 cliffhangers to be the best 2 cliffhangers in the history of literature. I mean, did you save the world? Is your wife dead? You don't know. I mean, wow.
Yeah, that's right up there with I Am Your Father.
Yeah.
Well, that's like the end of At the Earth's Core, where it's like they've been trying to get out of Pellucidar. They get out, and it ends with, I got to go back.
Yep.
She's still there. I've got to go get her.
Yeah.
So he knew how to bring you back.
Gentlemen, I think that our audience has been illuminated. They know much more about pulps and what's good and what's bad and what's worked and what hadn't and all that. I appreciate it. We're out of time. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome. Very nice to hang with you guys.
Definitely.
Yes, and for those of you, welcome to Dragon Con. Those of you that have not been here before, So
Absolutely. We're getting